Leaders of the BRICS nations are in Johannesburg, South Africa, for their 15th Heads of State and Government Summit, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS bloc seeks to navigate a complex landscape where the Ukraine war and intensifying rivalries between major powers have added urgency to their discussions. As these nations gather to deliberate on issues ranging from expanding membership to strengthening economic cooperation, the summit takes on renewed significance in shaping a more balanced global order. Now, today on The Square, we will delve into the key themes and challenges that underpin the ongoing BRICS Summit, offering insights into the diverse perspectives and aspirations of its member nations. I am Kemini Amano. You're welcome to The Square. Joining our gathering today are Seho Putu. Seho is a development economist. She's joining us from Dublin, Ireland. We also have Imbulen Zege Leonard, who is a political economist at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square.
Thank you very much.
Now, we know that the heads of states are yet to officially, begin their discussions, as of the time we were coming on air. But I want to find out from you, Seho, what are your expectations for this 15th summit? What are you looking out for?
Right. So we're looking out for discussions on the expansion of BRICS to include 40 other countries. We're looking out for discussions on the development of the new development bank and how it plans to expand following the post-COVID time that we are in, and also in the context of increased global prices because of the Russia and Ukraine war. But we're also looking at increased cooperation with friends of BRICS and their strategy towards Africa and what that could entail. We know that right now, Africa, there's a lot of global challenge between the West and new emerging powers over Africa. So those are some of the emerging themes that we hope to see over the next few days at the BRICS Summit.
Indeed. And those are things also that President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, outlined in his speech to the nation, or by extension, the rest of the world, prior to BRICS. So let's start off with the expansion, and I do want to bring that conversation to you, Leonard. At this point, BRICS has indicated that it wants to look at discussions on expansion. It would look at what criteria it should use in picking its new members. What are your thoughts about how they should go about picking their members, not only for the good of the members, but also for the good of the association or the group in terms of its clout?
The BRICS
Leonard, I think you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Leonard.
Okay. So, as Seho noted, the BRICS Summit is currently taking place in an environment whereby the international order is rapidly changing. This has been, first of all, foremost preceded by Western nations turning more towards mercantilism and protectionist measures, which are at the detriment of countries, particularly in the global south, as well as emerging economies. And this has also been accelerated by the changes which have become necessary in the post-COVID global economy and political environment. So what's happening now with the BRICS countries is that they're essentially asserting themselves as an alternative to the prevailing global order, which had existed since after World War II and had also reformed itself a bit after the Cold War, but then has to a large extent not been able to meet up with the developmental needs of the global south as well as emerging nations. So, the desire for these countries, and they're very, very diverse. You have large economies such as Argentina, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Indonesia, whilst you also have smaller economies such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, as well as Ethiopia, but all of them have the same desire to join the BRICS initiative and benefit from the cooperation ties which they are could benefit from in that regard, because the BRICS nations at present they hold upwards of a quarter of the global GDP. And I think that what the BRICS members are going to try to do is, as much as they want to leverage and develop increased ties with these countries as well as assert the influence, they're also going to approach it in a matter that it doesn't encroach in their interest.
I see. I do want us to stay on the subject of expansion, Sergio. Obviously, it will be beneficial, like Leonard has outlined, but expansion also, as we are learning, is not a subject that there is consensus on among the core member nations. Is there justification for why, countries like Brazil would think that having more members on board will dilute clout for BRICS, or perhaps the rivalry between India and China itself, I beg your pardon, is setting the tone for the lack of consensus on the subject of expansion. Seho, you're muted.
Now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you. I definitely do think that there are cons to expanding membership. It does add another level of complexity to decision making. As you've already said as well, it increases the complexity in relationships. You've already pointed out that there are some challenges between India and China. And the more countries you add, the more the likelihood of complex relationships like this becoming present. What we will also see is that there might be a dilution of the focus for BRICS, the more members you add. Right now, these are larger economies in various geopolitical positions. And the more groups or the more countries that you add, the focus starts to shift as well. But adding other groups also, or other countries also, slows down implementation because there are more people to speak with, decision-making processes are longer, and prioritization is longer as well. So it's not as simple. Some concerns that have been raised by Brazil and other countries just looking into BRICS, I think are completely valid. But I also think that there are pros which are equally as important. So it's about every country in the union right now determining for themselves what would be the best move forward.
Do you think that those concerns and differences on differences on whether or not there should be expansion of BRICS could pose an obstacle for countries that have officially applied to join the group?
I do think so. But I think without the initial 5 members agreeing on a position, it's going to be very difficult to bring anyone else. But the pros of expanding membership do include diverse perspectives, enhanced influence with more countries that take up landmass in the world, and also who have bigger economies joining. That enhances the economic power of an organization like BRICS, and also increases the regional representation and pools resources. So there are multiple pros, but it is going to be determined by agreement from the initial 5 members.
Indeed. I do want us to now look at the speech that President Ramaphosa gave ahead of the BRICS Summit. One of the things that he spoke about that stood out to me was the fact that they will not align with they being South Africa, will not align with any global power or side with any global power. And he was making that comment in reference to the situation in Ukraine and, the absence of Vladimir Putin, Russian president, at the summit. But Yes, what I want us to do. When we cast our mind back to the foreign ministers' BRICS Summit, during that period and shortly after that, South Africa had spoken tough on its ability to host Russian President Vladimir Putin in person without necessarily executing the ICC warrant on his head. Leonard, talk to us about what you think changed between that period and the position that Ramaphosa, outlined yesterday or 2 days ago, rather.
Well, one thing about the South African foreign policy is that it's very rules based, such that even if there is a position taken by the ruling party, the African National Congress, at the level of national government, they're always going to adhere to the various international conventions and protocols which South Africa is a party to. So, in that regard, it wasn't necessarily a disalignment from what South Africa's foreign policy position is, but then it was just a matter of following the rule of law. And there was a lot of talk and media coverage with respect to what would happen if Putin came to South Africa for this conference. And in many respects, you can see that it actually took away from what are the burning issues pertaining to what's going to be on the agenda for the BRICS Summit. So in this regard, South Africa has a very unique foreign policy in the sense that it's one of the few African countries which has its, technicals across all regions in the world, and which, can actually speak somewhat on an equal basis with many of the global powers. And as a result, we've seen that even though there was a lot of pressure from the U.S. to, condemn the Russian conflict with Ukraine, South Africa stood its ground, and as a result, they've continued to be able to not only engage with Russia, China, and the other BRICS nations, but then also with Western countries such as United States.
I see. So, Seho, for the rest of the world at that point, South Africa standing up against the global powers and saying this is our country. If Russia wants to do business in our country, they could do. It would have been a pivotal point for BRICS. Do you think that BRICS lost the opportunity to stand up to the same alternative, to stand up to the same power is trying to be an alternative to?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Great question. I think that there was strong support for Putin to arrive in South Africa. And the decision South Africa has made as well, as Leonard has spoken to it already, comes from historic ties with Russia, supporting the liberation struggle in South Africa. But there was a strong feedback from Russia and South Africa that they did not want to see South Africa becoming embarrassed in this, if there had to be intervention from the ICC and other Western powers, and really halting the discussions that were to take place. So to make sure that the conversation was not stopped by extra and external drama, they decided against having Putin attend in person. It is an unfortunate situation that this group that is trying to be against the global order, or to stand against the polarity in the global system, is backing down. But I think for the discussion to continue and for decisions to be made, I think it was a good call that they took.
I see. But so let's talk about the absence of Russia and the impact it could. Because, I mean, it may look like an absence, but Sergei Lavrov is there, the foreign minister. We also know that Vladimir Putin is expected to join virtually. But it would seem that it's lost some clout when it comes to that. Do you see same, Leonard? What impact could it have on the summit, on BRICS?
I don't think it will have a substantive impact because, as we know, Sergei Lavrov is Putin's eminence grise. There isn't a cabinet member who's closer to him, and Sergei Lavrov also knows the terrain. He's been deployed to Africa several times since the start of the war against Ukraine. So even at the interpersonal level with a lot of the ministers and decision makers, he has a relationship. So I don't think Putin's visit will, his absence will take away from the grandeur or at least even the overall agenda which is associated with this event. And as Sekho has said, it's very momentous in the sense that we're really seeing a magnificent push by BRICS to change the global order, because as we noted, the prevailing system, which is having institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, leading the charge in terms of global economics, it hasn't worked to the favor of developing and emerging countries. So now this BRICS summit is coming to the forefront in, trying to plot a way forward such that institutions like the New Development Bank, can take up the mantle which these institutions haven't been able to with respect to, providing the economic needs of the majority of the global economies. And Putin's absence will not put a damper on pursuing such an initiative.
I see. So let's talk about, the alternative to the global order and whether or not BRICS has the wherewithal, it has the capacity as it is now, and perhaps what it could do to be that alternative for the global south. Seho, I'm going to start with you. The core of BRICS is the fact that they want to be an alternative. They want to be a change in how global institutions operate in the world, particularly with countries or nations in the global south. As they are now, are they providing that alternative enough?
Yeah, I think that they are starting to make the conversation on global government reform more prominent. I think before there have been ample discussions on the global south, the so-called global south, really coming together and challenging Western hegemony. And I think this coalition of economic powerhouses across various parts of the world is a solid step towards multipolarity in the global system. I think it's very important for South-South cooperation and getting other countries in the so-called global South working together and making decisions for themselves. I do think BRICS is a step in the right direction. Seeing future expansion and how that will work, I think conversations of that as well is a step in the right direction. But I think at the moment, BRICS is a very powerful step towards new thinking and new perspectives on the global order.
I see. Let's look at the parallel of the economic the economic motive, the economic objective of BRICS as against the political alignment of individual nations. And let's see where the nexus could be. Because when you take, again, I'll come back to India and China. While China, is trying to be an alternative global power against the U.S., there is India, on the other hand, that is fostering ties a lot with the U.S. And it goes through the five-member nations. Where do you think they can begin to draw commonality when it comes to their economic progress, Leonard?
What's interesting is that despite the differences that these countries have in terms of their political trajectory and their current economic status, all of them have gone through various eras of significant economic transformation and political as well. South Africa was under apartheid, and now they've had to evolve into a full-on democratic system. India faced significant challenges as the world's largest economy, but has done a significant job in terms of lifting people out of poverty. We don't need to go into China. Russia also had a configuration from being a communist regime towards becoming a country which embraces to a certain extent market economics. And then you also have Brazil, which is the largest economy in South America. So all of these dynamics can come together, and their various experiences can also serve as examples to the countries which are desirous to become members of BRICS. So even though they are very, very different in terms of, I said, their political trajectory, as well as their pathways towards economic development and progress, what I think that a lot of these countries can benefit from is the fact that they haven't taken a single way towards attaining the various successes that they've achieved. So I think the BRICS model is a good foundation, and it's something which now these desirous countries can look forward towards, and which the BRICS nations can also project in that regard.
Very well. So, what challenges do you think the geopolitical alignment could pose for this common economic objective that BRICS nations have? And, by extension, even those who want to join BRICS right now, those who have officially applied to join BRICS right now, we could have the same geopolitical differences with them. What challenges do you think it poses for BRICS and its objective to have a common economic front?
Thanks for the question. I think that if we have to take, for example, China and India, they are neighboring countries who have had long-standing border disputes, territorial claims. They have very similar interests and have had a strategic rivalry for a long time. So that is already in the context of the 5 countries. But I wonder, when we do expand it to including the 40 countries, we might see a lot of this happening again. But I think that in between all of these, including India and China, the pull towards making sure that they have a seat at the global table as emerging global powers might supersede their challenges that have been long-standing. So I think it's about countries really trading off their long-term ambitions for some of the geopolitical struggles that they have. And I think that that's something that is going to be central in making BRICS work, but also making whatever expanded version of BRICS work as well.
I see. We'll see how that pans out when we finally know how members will be recruited into the groups. Because again, the geopolitical alignment and, as you put it, Seho, struggles, the list is endless. We'll be right back. You're watching Village Square Africa. When we come back, we'll talk a bit more about the use of local currencies, which is also on the agenda today. BRICS has made clear that we are not looking at a common currency. However, we are looking at member states being able to trade in their local currencies. How that will work, we'll have Seho and Leonard share their thoughts with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. Today our discussions border on the ongoing BRICS Summit in South Africa. The 3-day event has seen member states, 5 of them now represented in South Africa. Vladimir Putin, who's Russian president, will join virtually, but he's physically represented by his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. Still with us here on the program are Seho Putu, who is a development economist from Dublin, Ireland. We also have Mbulan Zege, Leonard, who is a political economist from the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. I did say I wanted us to start off the second part of our conversation with trade and the local currency. So let's start with local currencies. BRICS has made clear we won't have a common currency. Whether or not that is useful, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But what they have also said in addition to it is the fact that they want to ensure that the chokeholds that the dollar has on nations, particularly those in the global south and less developed nations, needs to be broken. And the way they want to do it is to use is to trade in local currencies. So how do you think that increased use of local currencies could contribute to economic stability and development of BRICS? Is this even possible at all?
Yeah, great question. I think that using local currencies really mitigates exposure to exchange rate fluctuations, as lots of countries won't have to convert to a third-party currency like the dollar, which really helps to reduce uncertainty in trade and financial dealings, which provides stability to businesses, investors, and governments. But one thing we'll also see is that there'll be lower transaction costs because they won't need to convert, which means that there'll be savings for businesses and basically actors who are engaged in intra-trade within the BRICS area. And it also boosts multiple countries' monetary policy as well. So I think that this indicates that BRICS is really looking for localization and empowering member states and their monetary policy rather than at the moment, as we have heard from the Minister of Foreign Trade in South Africa, there is a hesitance of trying to move to one currency. So I think at the moment, while BRICS is still trying to understand its feet in the geopolitical realm, individual and localized currencies is a good way to go right now.
So, Leonard, in order for there to be usefulness, in order for BRICS to achieve the use of local currency in trade, well, what are some of the things that need to be in place at this moment to make it easy? Because, I mean, when you think about it, even here on the continent where we expect a lot of nations to join BRICS, it's difficult to trade across borders without the use of the dollar.
And that was going to lead to one of the points I was going to make later on the show about the importance of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. African countries don't trade as much as each other, and if you look at the other regions which have experienced structural economic transformation or have experienced significant leaps in terms of their developmental status, interregional trade was at the core of it. And I believe that if African countries are able to pursue more efforts to trade with each other, that in itself can be a step towards encouraging countries to trade with each other in their local currencies. Because I think another great thing is that if you are trading in your local currency, there's a lower propensity for capital flight. There's a greater ability for the profits generated within the country to be spent within the country rather than being sent to offshore paradises. So I think that, for example, on the African continent, which has the largest number of potential aspirants to the BRICS initiative, and which has South Africa, which is the leading trade partner and most industrialized country in Africa as a BRICS member already. One way to push that would be able to, champion initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That doesn't mean that there are significant challenges in that regard, but I'm sure we'll allude to that as the show evolves.
Right. And what I want us to address, Leonard, is are those challenges, those significant challenges that you talked about. Because even with the after as it is now, if we are trading, what we are doing is we are boosting the use of the dollar. Because I cannot pay you in Kenyan shillings, you cannot pay me in Nigerian naira. It would have to be converted into the dollars before use. What are some of the changes we need to make in order to trade in our own currencies?
I think we need to localize our financial markets. As we've seen, there are very few viable stock exchange markets across the continent. And even in that regard, where they are viable, it's mostly dominated by one regional power. I mean, we think about South Africa, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, even though it's the largest financial market on the African continent, upwards of 95% of the transactions are done by South African companies. You look at in West Africa with respect to the Abidjan Stock Exchange, which is supposed to be the one undertaking financial transactions for the Francophone countries. The majority emanate from Cote d'Ivoire. You can still say the same for Nairobi. So I think what we need to do is that at the regional levels, we need to valorize now the use of these local currencies, right? We need to work with bodies such as ECOWAS, EMUA, for the Francophone countries, the East African community, because on a singular basis, it's going to be very, very difficult for countries to pursue such endeavors. But then now, if we pool our efforts and pool the resources, then I think at least elementary steps can be taken towards attaining those goals.
So, what role do you think that BRICS could be playing in all of this?
I think that BRICS can help to coordinate key challenges for trade. I think that it can specifically help with bilateral trade agreements and really just constructing the kind of regulation needed to facilitate this trade. They are talking a lot about the bank and some of the investments that can help to facilitate trade. And I would say just to boost the Continental Free Trade Agreement as well, that is going to be on the agenda point for this week. So I think that trade mitigating against trade blockages is something that BRICS can help.
I see. And speaking of BRICS and Africa, we know that is the theme. I want to stay with you, Seho. What are you hoping that African countries who attend the summit come out with at the end of it?
I think that we will like to see African countries become more empowered in becoming global actors and shaping the global political system. For many years, African countries have been seen as small contributors to the global economy and basically to global politics. We're seeing in various parts of Africa, we're seeing coups, we're seeing lots of movements, we're seeing protests, and a lot of them are against ex-colonial powers and basically uprisings against the political system of the world right now. So I would like to see countries coming out more confident about their ability to contribute to global discussions, with more of a plan as to how developing countries can look to industrialize. Big powers like China and Russia are big industrial powers, so maybe gathering some support and also with clearer trade strategies for African countries, a renewed confidence in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as well, with backers from these big global players. I think that's what I'd like to see coming out of this discussion.
I see. Leonard, I'll ask you the same question just before we move on to some other matters. How would you like to see African countries attending the summit come out?
Well, what we can see first and foremost is that BRICS is an an organization which has taken Africa very seriously. Africa's traditional partners in the West, some of them the former colonizers, have largely seen Africa as a basket case, as countries where they will prioritize the provision of aid rather than engaging in trade and investment. But then we've seen, for example, with, China has become the largest trade partner with most of these African countries. I mean, South Africa and China have only had 25 years of formal diplomatic relations, but then in that time, trade has gone from 1 billion rand to 500 billion rand in that time frame. So what we'd love to see is that African countries continue and governments continue to exercise, agency with respect to who they pursue international cooperation with, and express that agency in a way that not only are they able to get fairer deals in terms of the partnerships that they conclude, but then they execute transactions which help to, improve the livelihoods of their countries, as well as address their various serious developmental challenges. I mean, I'm looking at China and how they can help, for example, with respect the implementation of African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I'm in South Africa at present. Right now, I don't have electricity, and the country is going through a very serious energy crisis. How could countries like China and Russia, which are net exporters of electricity, come to the aid of countries like South Africa and others to remedy these causes? How can they help towards improving infrastructure in the domains of railways, roads, ports, and so on and so forth? That's what I'm looking for with respect to how African countries can benefit from this current engagement with the BRICS countries.
I see. So, who are the new members that you think could form a great alliance with BRICS, and why, if you were to pick?
I'd say some of the countries coming in from the Middle East. I know Saudi Arabia put their name forward, if I can recall. These are big countries. I think the United Arab Emirates as well. These are very strong and powerful countries in their own rights who have big leverage on trade of oil, and other, resources and commodities. And I think that their geopolitical influence as well is very important. So big countries like that do stand to add a lot of clout to the BRICS member states, and also help to leverage what BRICS is trying to achieve. So I'd say countries like that really do help.
I was hoping to hear, a country on the continent. Leonard, do you have any in your list? Leonard, can you hear us? Well, I don't think Leonard can hear us, but Seho, I was saying that I was hoping to hear, the name of an African nation on your list. We're told reportedly that Nigeria is one of those countries that is officially asked to be a member of BRICS. If that be the case, how important will a Nigerian alliance be to the bloc?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that a country like Nigeria being added to BRICS is important. We know that it has one of the largest economies in Africa, and its geopolitical clout in Western Africa is very important. It is an African giant, and having an African leader that is also embedded in ECOWAS and is doing important decision making in that region is key. So I think having a power like Nigeria on BRICS would be something that is important. In fact, it was probably something that should have happened a while ago. It will enhance cooperation, it will enhance trade. We know that Nigeria plays a big role as well in AFTA and how that's going to unfold. So that is something that I think moving forward would be a good and strong recommendation for BRICS.
Let's look ahead for BRICS now, and what the future portends for the bloc, but also for those nations that hope to become members of. Oh, Leonard is back. Look at that, Leonard. Perhaps you start on this one for us. We're looking ahead for what the future portends for BRICS and BRICS nations. What are you seeing from where you sit?
Well, in a coincidence, poetic justice, I was speaking about light cuts and my internet got cut because I'm currently experiencing light cuts. But in the future, as I said at the top of the show, BRICS is trying to reframe the global political order. And my hope is that they should continue with this agenda because, as we've spoken, and all of us are aware as Africans, the prevailing geopolitical order hasn't been to the benefit of us as Africans as well as to the population of the global South. There could be a lot of, disagreements with respect to the various countries. I know and India and China never get along with each other, and even South Africa has its own tribulations that is going through. There's an election next year. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. Certain parties don't want to be part of BRICS, but my hope is that regardless, BRICS should continue on this trajectory of trying to be at the vanguard of, promoting different forms of, cooperation within the economic, financial, diplomatic, and even political sense.
All right, Leonard and Seho, thank you so much. But before I let you go, breaking news coming into our news studios right now is the fact that African Union has suspended Niger for happenings in that country. As you may well know, last month there was a coup in Niger that ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. He's currently being held in the country and charged with treason. We know that there have been conversations between ECOWAS and the military leaders there, but Abdurrahmani Chiani, who is the leader of the junta, has told us that they need 3 years to transition back into civilian hands. ECOWAS, on the other hand, has said 3 years too long and too many coups happening in the Sahel, particularly in the West African region of the Sahel. Now we know that the AU has also taken action suspending Niger from the group. What this means, we'll find out a little later, but that's what we are hearing now in our news studios. African Union has suspended Niger. Let me pick quick reactions from my guests just before we let you go. Look, we didn't see this coming, but here it is. So I'll put you on the spot. I'll start with you, Seho. What do you think about this latest development as far as the situation in Niger is concerned?
I think that it's a tricky situation. There's a lot of interests involved. There's a lot of colonial influence as well. I do think that there seems to be a very strong support for some of the coup leaders in Niger. I know that there was a very the sentiment was anti the last president. That is what I'm seeing, and that is some of the discussions that I've had with different analysts. The AU moving this way, I think, is strategic, so that other countries do not also enact coups. We don't want to strengthen anti-democratic sentiment across the region. So I do think that it is a strong and bold move from the African Union, but we'll have to see how the situation unfolds.
Indeed, we will. Leonard, what's running through your mind now hearing that the AU has suspended Niger?
Well, the fact that the AU has suspended them means that they have acknowledged that it's a coup because there's been significantly ambiguous language. The ECOWAS leaders have said that they still consider Bazoum as the head of state, but now if the African Union is saying that they're suspended from the organization as a result of the end of the constitutional order and civilian rule, it means that they have formally acknowledged that there is a military takeover going on. I also think that it's also a mechanism for the African Union, as Seho said, to put more pressure on them because the military leaders are becoming increasingly emboldened. But then in the greater scheme of things, I think it just makes things very complicated because there's some states who are for military intervention, there's some states which are against, and the others which are saying that, dialogue should be prevailed. But then, long story short, the situation is very, very fluid.
Thank you so much, Leonard and Seho, for your time and insights on the subject matter we've discussed today, and including Niger as well. We hope to see you some other time. For you watching us from wherever you are, breaking news coming in. African Union has suspended Niger for the political crisis there. As you well know, last month there was a coup in Niger that ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. In charge now is the leader of the junta, Abdurrahmane Tiani. Will follow through on this breaking news and bring you updates right after Village Square Africa. You want to stay on for that as we go on ground and bring you more on this. I am Kemeni Aman. I hope to see you here again. Bye-bye.